Note the disclaimer. A brief message before we begin. This video is not for the faint of heart or those of a nervous disposition. Heavy topics will be discussed. So, sinning the final destination. Normally fair enough since this is the weakest of the franchise, and the fact that they called it that on the basis that it was the last one until the fifth one came out, so preemptive sin for acknowledging this film's existence.
You come here hoping to see a crash?
Of course it's to see a crash.
Welcome to the Final Destination's Freddy Cheeks. This guy is just as much of an asshole, but he actually gets laid and stuff. He has no redeeming qualities whatsoever, and you'll spend most of the runtime wishing someone will replace him that's more likable, like King Joffrey.
I wouldn't say that was strictly accurate. For one, he doesn't video people without their consent. Secondly, he actually looks attractive. It's just his attitude that's the problem. This isn't a defense of the guy's behavior, I'm just letting you know that Frankie Cheeks was way worse than this guy. And this film includes an unsubtle racist bastard, so 2 sins here. The second one is for making us remember Frankie Cheeks. Also, Game of Thrones called, and they want their dead king back for another round of poisoning.
Oh, here comes Nick with our stuff.
Introducing Nick, the movie's main character who is so devoid of personality you will spend most of the runtime wishing someone will replace him that's more charismatic, like a basketball.
Okay, that one was uncalled for. At least he does something to prevent people's deaths, other than Sam, whose pendulum swung in the opposite way.
Can someone please tell me if this movie is being sponsored by Pepsi? Because I haven't been given enough information to be sure.
Pointing things out on the screen cliché.
Oh, cool! It looks like Emmanuel in space finally settled down and had some kids. I'm so happy for her. I myself said goodbye to so many potential kids watching those documentaries.
You're sick, Jeremy.
Holy shit, did that car just run over Flipper?
Fucking hell, you got me.
So is anyone from this pit crew going to tell someone that a car is out there racing with a screwdriver stuck in it so that the race officials can throw out a caution flag? No? Okay, I guess everyone in Final Destination world is totally inept.
Oh, so now you know what a caution flag is? Well, anyway, not everyone in this world is inept. Death is just pulling the strings to make sure these things happen. You've already seen the first 3 films here, so you should know this by now. When Alex called out about the plane exploding, it still took off. Kimberly was the only one to notice the loose chain on the truck after the premonition, but it still continued to drive until the crash occurred. And even with Wendy screaming about the hydraulics, the roller coaster ride still went ahead. Even if someone called it in, the yellow flag may have come in a little bit too late, and the crash would still happen.
What's funny to me is when this tire blows up this woman's head, it just disappears. It's just gone. Like her former head took the tire into another dimension.
Really? That's the funny thing to you? Not the woman in the background laughing at Nadia's death?
Oh yeah, I forgot. A lot of the death in this movie is filmed for a 3D experience. All it does in this movie is make the deaths look super cheap as objects fly at you, sort of. It's even worse when you watch the movie in 2D and wonder why everything looks so stupid.
Fair point, but even without the 3D angle, the deaths look too cartoony in this movie. So instead I'm just going to give you another sin for focusing on the wrong details.
Cowboy.
As soon as the cowboy sat down in the vision, something happened on the track that got everyone to stand up. But here, that doesn't happen.
Oh goody. The old chestnut of everything in real life should be happening exactly like the vision. Please stop, man. The chestnut's burning now.
That's a lot of tampons for one woman.
Not with that attitude, you're not.
What?
We have to get out of here.
Thank God.
What? No, I got $500
No
on
one
the
cares.
way.
When someone shows 100% accurate clairvoyance about the future, I tend to listen to that person. Granted, in my world, this has never happened, but I would like to think that if my friend Nick could predict mom puts tampons in her son's ears, I'd listen to him about getting the f*** out of there.
I would agree with you if it wasn't for Janet breathing a sigh of relief and saying thank God after the suggestion. Plus, Hunt and Laurie were asking how he could possibly know what he knew earlier, so they don't exactly believe his clairvoyance yet. Also, the assumption that Jeremy has any friends besides Chris and Aaron.
Have you all lost your f***ing mind?
To be honest, I'm really happy this woman dies here, because I would have had a hard time distinguishing her from Janet.
Maybe you do need an optometrist appointment. I might too, if that helps. But still, Janet is almost always hanging around Nick, Laurie, and Hunt, while Nadia here only ever seemed to hang out with the mechanic Andy Cuser. The major differences are the hairstyles.
I don't know why this couldn't just be Final Destination 4.
Yep, you're drawing attention to it now. Okay, the reason it was called The Final Destination as opposed to Final Destination 4 was because it was supposed to be the last one in the series, until Final Destination 5 came along. Granted, the way it was marketed was as a surprise prequel to Final Destination 1, but still, the fact it was released at all was probably an indication that the franchise still had some juice in it. Similarly with Bloodlines, but realistically that's why people nowadays call it Final Destination 4.
Good to see the news is focusing on what really matters after tons of people died at the racetrack today. An opinion piece on whether amusement parks are going obsolete.
Jeremy points things out on the screen cliche. Although if you were really clever, you'd have pointed out that this is a reference to the Devil's Flight accident in Final Destination 3, and now because of that, people aren't going to amusement parks anymore. Plus, they bring up the Speedway disaster a little bit later.
Can we just try to forget about it?
You mean the massive death at the racetrack that you predicted and ended with a woman's head exploding right in front of you? Yeah, let's all try to forget that. Ooh, let's talk about boys.
Jeremy says something random cliche.
Random lingering close-up of coin is random and lingering.
Jeremy points things out on the screen cliche.
I wanted to thank you. You're a hero.
Who she should thank are her kids, who decided to run out of the stadium for basically no other reason than to make their mom chase after them.
I think you need a hearing aid, not contact lenses.
So you didn't notice Nick freaking out about the Speedway, and then her sons heard that and decided to heed his warning, prompting Samantha and her husband to follow them?
Nick's visions are as worthless as the pictures in Final Destination 3.
You went there. Just as I feared when I covered the second film. The only time they're more in-your-face and obvious, as opposed to directed or somewhat vague, is in the fourth film. But knowing my luck, you're going to send all of Nick's mini-visions too, huh? Well, at least the clues are more accurate here instead of vague like they were in the third film.
What's wrong?
I just had a really bad nightmare.
I'm pretty sure it was just excised clips from a direct-to-video Hellraiser sequel.
Hey? Do they still even make direct-to-video movies anymore? Oh, I guess they do. Well, this is still a Jeremy Says Something Random cliche, and no, I haven't received a call for it yet.
Jesus Christ, it's like someone hired the manatees from the South Park episode making fun of the Family Guy, and the plot they came up with is, what if we mixed Final Destination with Mississippi Burning?
There's the phone. Hello? Yep, just a sec. Jeremy, it's Mississippi Burning, and I'm on hold with South Park. They both want you to apologise for using them as examples in this horrendous scene. And since Family Guy was technically dragged into this mess as well, I'll expect a call from Seth MacFarlane soon.
The radio starts playing Wars, Why Can't We Be Friends? And this is a new, more positive side.
I'm going to stop you right there. This is Death putting racist Carter in his place. Taunting him with a song about racial harmony, considering he was about to burn a f***ing cross in George's backyard. This is what we in the business refer to as karma.
I was not invited to the no pants party at Nick and Laurie's.
This technically counts as sending something you like, by the way.
This magazine is all about sports, beer, gadgets, and cloths.
Pointing out things on the screen cliche.
I mean, there were flames, and there was a hook, and that red door.
I know what you did last summer while you were Hellraiser-ing with Insidious.
Shit! Alright, no more after this.
Someone got killed on his block, dragged down the street on fire.
So yeah, he said he couldn't come to work today. Said he'd rather be home, closer to the accident.
Not even close. Due to the incident involving Carter Daniels, they closed the road. So Richard couldn't make it to work even if he wanted to.
Goddamn chair.
Seeing as how there's no one else working right now, why do you even need to use this chair? I know at salons, hairstylists have their own little workspaces, but it's not like a law or something that they can't use another chair if one's available.
Well, sure, they're not universally required to stay there, but they aren't necessarily supposed to move about due to efficiency, hygiene, and client convenience.
Also, I know I made the Quentin Tarantino joke in the video for Final Destination 3, but goddamn, he could have directed this whole franchise.
Oh god, this again? If you do this for Final Destination 5 during the gymnastics routine, I'm gonna be pissed.
Let's go. Get in the car. I've got my eye on you two.
Which is a line that makes zero sense given the context. But her eye is about to get popped out by a flying rock, so I guess death compelled her to say it as a sick joke.
Maybe? However, this was meant to be a form of foreshadowing.
This is a fairly funny death, since everything in the salon was a death trap and none of it ended up killing Stephanie.
Hold the phone! Who's Stephanie? If you mean the one who died, then closer, but her name is Samantha. At least I actually take the time to memorize the characters' names before trying to make a video about them, Jeremy.
It seems a rock was hit by a lawnmower and sent through her head moving at light speed.
If this wasn't pointing things out on the screen, you'd make a terrific radio news reader.
We stayed up Googling premonitions, visions, signs, things like that, just to see how much information we could get.
It was annoying enough that Final Destination 3 was trying to make us believe that none of those characters had heard about the Flight 180 incident, but now it's just insane.
Again, they thought it would have been an urban legend. And the third and fourth films don't even take place in New York, unlike the first, second, fifth, and sixth films. These ones, however, take place in Pennsylvania.
Some say the chain can be broken. Like if you were to intervene into someone else's death, that would end it.
The assholes who say that never check to see if those people are still alive.
Well, Kimberly is still alive. And I wouldn't imagine there's any blog posts about surviving horrific accidents and now death is after me. And since the other movies, aside from Bloodlines, took place before 2009, unlike this one, Reddit wasn't much of a thing. So the best they could do is news reports and witness testimonies, as well as the case of the New York disaster survivors, probably even Bloodworth's personal recollections.
The Final Destination proves once and for all that death can create the Bruce Almighty Moon just as well as God can.
Hang on, you said that about the Wild Robot as well. A video both Luke and Captain Vader covered, and one I hope to cover soon. But you're way off here. This is a close-up of the moon, and when we move to the next shot, which is Nick and Laurie in the now ruined stadium seating, the moon is as it normally would be. I didn't even need the phone here since that wasn't even a pop culture reference.
Maybe this was a really bad idea.
Visiting a damaged structure that could still be potentially unstable? It is, in fact, a terrible idea, Laurie.
Jeremy yells at the screen cliche.
There. That's where that guy in the mechanic jacket died.
So he's next, then?
I think so.
Just because you figured out where he died doesn't mean you figured out when he died.
He was trying to work out who was next after Samantha, and thanks to the CCTV, he knew it was going to be the mechanic, Andy. When he dies, doesn't matter, since he's trying to prevent his eventual death.
And that's when you die. And then Laurie, and then me.
But Laurie and George die at the same time, so why didn't Nick phrase it that way? There's no way to know which of them would go first.
It's possible George was hit by the fireball first, and Laurie soon after. It's like Nora and Tim in the Pinto on Route 23. Nora was most likely dead first from the impact of the crash, then Tim was caught in the resultant fireball. Or like Ian and Erin, and eventually Julie and Perry on the Devil's Flight roller coaster when it was hanging upside down. Ian fell to his death first after losing his grip, then Erin, then Julie, then Perry. The only evidence where we see people dying together and their fates become intertwined are Ashley and Ashlyn in the third movie and Hunt and Janet here.
Maybe if we can stop this mechanic from getting killed, we can break the chain.
Yeah, maybe.
Jeremy yells at the screen cliche.
Or maybe you might want to read about what happened to the people next in line after the chain was broken.
Oh, oops! Well, he does mention that two possibilities occurred. It would either stop the chain, or change the batting order, as he puts it. But he doesn't know what to expect here since Bloodworth isn't around to help these people.
These fuckers walk straight into a dangerous ass garage instead of going to a front desk and asking if they know a guy who went to the race the other day.
How do you know they didn't go to an admin desk? They could have told the group that he was in the garage.
Watching Nadia die like that in front of me. I lost my wife and my daughter in a car accident. I was driving, and I was drunk.
Hold on, those are two very different scenarios. Andy lost Nadia in a freak accident that he was 100% not responsible for, other than having terrible tastes in sporting events. George's wife and daughter died because of George. How did George even get a job as a security guard or in any kind of law enforcement after that? Now I'm more interested in getting answers to that question than anything else this movie has to offer.
Sure, the scenarios are different, but they both resulted in loss and grief. However, did you really have to add in that bit about people not enjoying motor racing as a sporting event? Or asking how George became a security guard after a drink driving collision? Look, this is pretty much one of the weakest films in the franchise, but coming up with bullshit sins to sin it for is like trying to find reasons why Velma sucks, when half to 3/4 of the reasons why lie directly in the dialogue.
Death not only knew how they were going to kill the mechanic, they knew that the heroes would show up and be indirectly responsible for his death.
Jesus, you sound just like the FBI agents when they were grilling Alex about Todd, Terry, and Miss Luton's ensuing accidents. But need I remind you that death is omnipresent in this franchise? And no, the heroes are not responsible. Alex didn't cause Terry or Billy's deaths, was indirect in Luton's death, rescued Carter from the Chevy, rescued Clear from her car, and was also indirect for Carter's death. Kimberly only witnessed Tim's death despite screaming about pigeons, as well as Kat, Rory, Clear, and Eugene. Wendy didn't realise Frank was in front of her, but witnessed his, Lewis, Ian, Perry, Ian, Julie, and Kevin's deaths, but did save Ian from the hardware store, rescued Julie from a harrowing encounter with a horse, and pulled Kevin away from a fireball before he got torched. Nick here is also trying to keep people safe. Now, if this were directed to Sam, I'd mostly agree.
They should have had someone drinking this Clear Rivers water in a whipped cream bikini, to sell this Easter egg's extreme obviousness.
I was going to make a Carl's Jr. joke here, but I think they've thankfully done away with the Slutburger campaign. So instead I'm just going to say not a sin and leave it there.
Hunt, listen to me, buddy. Listen, no water, okay? Stay away from water.
Why doesn't Nick tell Hunt why he needs to stay away from water? Or be a little more specific with what he saw in the vision?
A few reasons. One, he was left on voicemail and was about to start driving again. And being on your phone for a long time in a car with the key still in the ignition barrel would have ensured a hefty fine. Secondly, voicemails aren't particularly long. Some only last from 2 to 5 minutes, and Nick would need a lot more time explaining what he saw and to tell Hunt to avoid several areas so that he doesn't end up in a watery grave. Thirdly, even if those first two weren't the issue, Hunt was probably not going to believe Nick due to how dismissive he was in the meetup the day before.
Kids.
Jeremy expresses his disdain for kids cliche.
Do you know if there's a car wash around here?
Yeah, there's one on 18th.
It's the only car wash in town.
Correction, it's the only car wash we see, with the implication being that there's more in this town.
Yes, I own you, machine.
She's just checking to make sure she can close the sunroof now? After she's already paid for the car wash?
Well, if you were paying attention, the sunroof was malfunctioning earlier, so it may have opened on its own again before reaching the car wash.
Hunt dives in the pool and swims towards the drain, but then the film cuts, and his back is to the drain, and he's being sucked down. Is the movie trying to say the drain is powerful enough to turn Hunt's body around? And if the drain is this powerful, how have none of the other people swimming in the pool for the last few minutes been sucked into it?
I think that's mostly because people usually avoid the drains as they swim, especially the squirt gun kid, who I think was more off to the side given how close he was to the edge of the pool. Not only that, but Hunt inadvertently created that situation for himself by dropping the gun by the switch, which activated the drain. And I think normally pool drains aren't that strong. So if you just left it at the strength thing, you'd be right. But then you had to butcher it by saying the rest of the swimmers would be sucked in.
I'm at peace with it. And, my family's waiting for me.
The family that died because of George? That family? I'm sure they're waiting with open arms.
What are you, a nihilist?
When we're done in here, we need to make sure to safe-proof the bedroom next.
I understand the precautions, but unless you plan on staying here at the house forever, I don't understand how safe-proofing the house does much other than maybe keep you protected at home, and that's it.
Well, yes, they were planning on staying there forever, much like how Alex tried to do in the first film. What's so hard to understand about that?
Nick's coffee spills on a newspaper article about 3 students getting killed in a coffee shop, which is exactly how the 3 survivors of this movie are going to die later. And I'm truly beginning to believe that death knows it's in a movie right now. I'm surprised we haven't seen it pop up on screen with some witty pop culture references a la Deadpool.
This man thinks he's Deadpool. Anyway, pointing out things on the screen cliche for the first half, and again fails to realise that death is supposed to be omnipresent for suspense reasons. Giving him a visage takes away the supernatural capabilities.
I've been trying to kill myself all day.
Saving Janet must have destroyed the list then.
Where is Laurie getting that rationale from? If George couldn't do what he wanted to do, it says more to me that Death has another plan on how to kill him.
The idea is once you get off Death's list, like Kimberly and Burke did, Death will stop coming for you and allow you to live the normal life until you pass naturally. But that didn't happen because even though Janet was saved, Hunt still died, meaning that Death is still moving down the list, and there's one more before George, which he and Nick bring up later.
It's in 3D.
Lovelace dying? Yeah, I think I'll be alright. Sounds like a chick flick.
When we see the footage, it clearly isn't a chick flick, so I don't know why Nick is never corrected here.
Maybe because Laurie didn't think of it to be an action thriller movie? As well as the fact that you're not supposed to be on your phone in the cinema. Nick was mostly going off of the name, and he was too busy packing for their European trip.
Remember that guy who sat in front of me at the race with the cowboy? He didn't die, all right? Which means he's next.
But why hasn't Death killed him yet? Did Death want to make sure Nick heard some convenient news position before taking out the cowboy?
No. He was in a coma, and Death wanted more of a spectacle for him, just like with Eugene in the second movie.
It's been at least a couple days since the incident at the racetrack, so why does the cowboy still have blood all over his face?
I think that's more the scars trying to heal over.
Where's Laurie?
I've been calling and texting all afternoon. She's not picking up her phone.
Laurie somehow very conveniently didn't pick up her phone all day with her beloved boyfriend calling, despite not even being in the movie for most of that time.
I think Laurie was more focused on hanging with Janet for a while before she and Nick went on their gap year through the Netherlands. Also, despite the newer interconnectedness of 2009, thanks to social media and the iPhone, people in those days were still more physically social than they are nowadays. Understandably so, given the landscape of a disease rhyming with Snowvid mine scene, so she couldn't be on her phone all day.
The tub falling on the cowboy scene is perhaps one of the laziest kills they have ever done in this franchise.
You know what? You do have a point. If you forget about the fact that an off-screen brick killed Alex Browning and eventually the shooting death of Agent Jim Block in Final Destination 5.
My wife said that deja vu is like God's way.
This is what I'm talking about. I mean, the guy driving this ambulance is probably the same guy who drove the bus that killed Terry in the first Final Destination, right?
Wrong. He makes an appearance in a Final Destination novel called Death of the Senses, where after Terry's death, he loses his job and ends up on the streets. Then he foresees a murder spree, saves a few people by eliminating the threat, and gets shot by a police officer. Plus, that still would have been in New York anyway, while this would still be set in Pennsylvania.
Nick notices the medical symbol from his vision earlier. That one was tied to the cowboy's tub death.
Hold it! Take a look at this evidence here, Jeremy. The watery-looking scenes here, as well as the surging electricity, the faucet, and the splatter, were for Jonathan Groves, the cowboy. Meanwhile, the snake and staff and the sirens were meant for George. So if you were paying attention, you would have got that, similarly with Hunt and Janet's joint vision about pool drains, coins, and pressure gauges for Hunt, and car wash rollers and control panels for Janet.
I didn't buy him for you, I bought him for Nick. He likes me in sneaks.
I feel pretty confident in stating that when a young man's girlfriend asks him what is the one accessory they could purchase that would make him the happiest, the answer is never sneakers.
Maybe not your fantasies, but other people have interest in more bizarre things. But I'm not going to get into that.
I feel like the active construction of new auditoriums in a theater wouldn't happen unless they closed the theater. But even if this does happen, it's a fucking sin.
Huh. Birdman was right. CinemaSins is Saw 3, even though that has nothing to do with this franchise. But seriously, it's a sin if the movie does something, but if it doesn't do that thing, it's still a sin. There's no way to win here.
Also, was this just a coincidence Laurie almost got killed by an escalator? Or was Death just f***ing with her before the real kill happens?
It was most certainly the latter.
Theater 13, second door on your left.
This is a 3D movie, but neither the box office cashier nor the usher gave them any glasses.
There is one place left that you didn't consider, Jeremy. The concession stand. Nowadays, however, 3D movies aren't viewed with those special glasses anymore.
For some reason, in this vision, Nick gets a very specific look at the explosion in the theater. In his previous visions, he's just given random signs that will hopefully point him to the outcome. With Janet and Hunt, all he knew was that water would come into play with their attempted murders. Did this vision know we were getting close to the finale? Did the vision read the script?
Oh, I was worried about this when I covered Final Destination 2. Lovely to know that my fears were justified. And why are you trying to meta movie? There's no point.
Even if you're trying to save a life, this is a dick move.
Again, he's under duress at this point, meaning he can't make intelligent or calculated decisions.
I know that's a giant fan, but is it powerful enough to move a metal cart that is loaded down like this? If that's the case, why would they ever even use the fan?
Ventilation, drying concrete, and your run-of-the-mill temperature control. There. Could have been like, what, a few seconds? Maybe even an hour to research this, and it wouldn't have been a sin.
I don't know why building new auditoriums in a theater requires this many barrels of combustible material.
Nor I, but the real sin is, or should be, that the barrels are labelled spontaneously combustible, which means they would be apt to blow at any given moment, which is a major guff on the production's part. So since you missed that, I'm just going to chalk it up to another hyper-observance fail and sin it there.
This audience reacting in unison is almost as ridiculous as movies that have teenagers at prom all performing an impromptu and insanely choreographed dance number.
Jeremy has never heard of flash mobs. In fact, personal anecdote time, I've been to several school dance parties during my younger years, and almost everyone was able to bust out a near-perfect Nutbush Cindy Limits dance like this example here.
Lori, it's over. Nothing is gonna happen.
This movie's version of Amanda Crew decides not to take Lori seriously, even after all the stuff they've been through in this movie.
Because Janet was rescued from the car wash and nothing has happened since. There's even a deleted scene in which she walks out into traffic and no one hits her. So because of this, she's less apt to believe that there's any danger left, unlike Lori here.
First off, let's go over some things this theater f***ed up when making showtime for Lovelace dying.
Let's not.
Are you kidding me?
I'm surprised your girlfriend didn't tell you the time of the movie.
I think it's more the fact that it was one of the 9 theatres that spooked him, since even for a 3D movie, this practically has an Avengers Endgame-sized opening week. And yes, Avatar would have also had a big opening week, but that's beside the point.
Also, the lasher.
Pointing out things on the screen cliché.
I have yet to see one reason why Lovelace dying is a 3D movie. Also, I think this movie is The Long Kiss Goodnight.
Well, yes, you were right about the scene inclusion, but that's not important. Anyway, the reason why it's a new 3D film is because they added dialogue, and it being made to look like a 3D movie with the double pictures here. But I don't want to spend too much time with the literal cinema sins and just move on.
The chances the explosion behind the screen would be timed perfectly with the explosion on the screen are astronomical.
Oh, for f***'s sake, this is how death operates in this world! For the 4th bloody time, death makes things happen in these movies because the characters that escaped the initial disaster are supposed to be dead. And death here has a sick sense of humour.
I would have removed all the sins if Janet turned to them right now with all this stuff sticking out of her and once again said,
I was meant to see this movie.
But it doesn't happen, so you don't. And stop lying, you still would have sinned her for this anyway.
Lori starts spitting up blood because her leg and foot get caught in the escalator? Movie doesn't anatomy correctly.
Nor do many horror movies. Are you gonna sin those too? Yeah, you are.
Also, good to see Nick wakes up just in time not to save George, because the real twist is that Nick's visions are also racist.
You've done and said worse. And these weren't as bad as racist Carter.
This door was cracked open and there was already a pretty serious fire brewing. How did no one smell some smoke or notice anything prior to Nick showing up?
Because the contractors went on their lunch break and the theatre patrons as well as other mall shoppers, seeing the construction bollards, would have avoided them.
This perfectly placed pile of flammable nonsense is perfectly placed and nonsensical.
Pointing things out on the screen cliché. Again.
Look, we were wrong about the order before. What if we're wrong about breaking the chain?
And we wouldn't be here at all.
Damn it, Janet!
Jeremy yells at the screen cliché.
This works and it really shouldn't. That's a chemical fire.
Yes, but if you remember, which you clearly don't because you didn't cover it, the fire extinguisher had run out while Nick was putting the initial fire out. Then he had to stamp out the rest of it with his foot, and now he's left with no other option but to use a burning plank to trigger the sprinkler system because he was shot in the arm by a nail gun, pinning him to the wall. And sure, this isn't real, but this isn't our reality!
Why is death giving Nick, Lori, and Janet 2 more weeks if it's still after them?
If we're being fair here, this is less than what Alex, Kimberly, and Wendy all got. But it's because death wants to give them false hope. I've already had to explain this to you for 4 bloody films, and you still don't get it?
Considering that It's Coming and Eileen are both scratched into the table here, it's a goddamn shame no one scratched the word on above Eileen, you know? Because of the song?
I can tell you weren't actually going to Dexy's Midnight Runners. But if you spent less time thinking of cringe sexual comments and more time watching the movie, then we wouldn't be having these problems.
What if us being here, right now, was the plan from the beginning?
Well, my answer is that would be stupid. Why would death do that?
Yelling at the screen again. And with that, court is adjourned. Be sure to leave any more suggestions for CinemaSins sins down below, and I will see you all in the next video.